Hi everybody, welcome back to the journey of my YouTube channel. Today I'm doing another monthly wrap-up video, which I have not done since July. And back in July, one reason that I made that video was that I had broken my record for most books read in 1 month. And I think I might have actually broken that record again in October, or at least I think I might break that record again in October. So I'll mention again in a few minutes how those numbers work and why it's a little bit hard to say right now how many books I've read in October. But before I get to those numbers, I wanted to mention another number that's kind of fun, and that number is my number of subscribers, which is over 50 now, and I haven't mentioned that yet in a video. So thank you all for giving me your time and your push of that subscribe button. I'm very glad to have you here. When I started this channel a few months ago, it was really just to learn how to make videos and make some friends and figure out if I even like doing this. So I'm very pleased with how far I've come and how far we've come so far. I haven't been doing anything intense to try to grow the channel or get a bunch of followers or anything. I've really just been trying it out and meeting some people and experimenting and having fun. So it's nice to hit a milestone like that. So October reads. The first book that I finished reading in October was Wistress by Nadine Brandes, which I talked about a little bit in my perfect book tag video, and I got some comments that the cover is really pretty, and it is. I also talked about how the page length, which I think is 451, is right around my ideal page length for a book. So this one was a lot of fun. I've read all of Nadine Brandes' other books. It's been a couple years since one has come out, so I was definitely excited to read another one. It took me a little bit to really get into this, but by the end there were some really cool scenes, some really neat stuff happening. I enjoyed the setting. It is based on the Netherlands, I think, which makes it feel kind of unique, even though technically I guess it could be considered medieval fantasy, but I never felt like it was just the stereotypical medieval fantasy setting because it had that unique cultural influence. And it also has a pretty cool magic system with the Well of Talents versus the Night Well, and both of those went in some pretty interesting directions that I wasn't expecting. And the character arcs were also cool. Like I said, there were some really intense scenes near the end that I enjoyed. There are a lot of very developed and rounded characters, and there's also quite a bit of humor. There's one character especially that made me laugh quite a bit, so I definitely appreciated that. There are probably people who would love this even more than I did because it's very YA, and I am less of a YA reader than I was a few years ago. So I think people who really love YA will not be able to get enough of this. And I think if I were more of a YA reader, I would have been like a little bit more enthusiastic about it. But even though I'm not a YA reader as much as I used to be, even though it's not really my favorite age range to read in, I still would definitely say that I enjoyed this one. And if you like the cover, you will probably like what's inside it too. The next book that I finished in October was The Sea Before Us by Sarah Sundin, which I largely read because, well, for one thing, I had heard her called the Queen of Character Arcs, and it is also a World War II historical fiction, and I don't read as much historical fiction as I should. I hadn't read one in a really long time. I read a lot more fantasy and sci-fi, so I was like, okay, it's time. I'm actually going to read one of these World War II books. And I did enjoy it. It was especially a nice change of pace because I was reading so much fantasy and so much sci-fi at the same time period. But it was a little bit different than I expected because I thought that World War II was going to be a lot more central to it, and I expected the book to deal more with the larger scale of World War II and what was going on in the whole world at that time and the stakes for the whole world. But that's not really what the story was about. The story was much more about the main two characters and their relationship. And I would say the war was really used as symbolism and a driving force for the relationship rather than the relationship being symbolism and something to humanize the story for the story being about the war, if that makes sense. So the point was the people in their relationships rather than the large scale war and that conflict and those worldwide stakes. And I think for a lot of people, that's going to be exactly what they want. I am usually one for the more plot heavy, high stakes, world ending stories. So at times that made it feel a little bit less, I guess, intense or exciting versus what I thought it might be since it was about World War II. But if you're really going in for the character arcs, I did think that the character arcs were done very well. I liked the female character, and there are not all that many female protagonists that I really like and relate to, especially in that age range. A female protagonist. A lot of times I have trouble with them, and I did like this one more than most. So yeah, this is a second book that I think I'm not the main target audience for, but I did definitely appreciate it anyway, and it was a nice change of pace from my main standard fare. The next book that I finished in October was Shadows of Self. So Wax and Wayne slash Mistborn Era 2 Book 2. And I did definitely enjoy this one. I liked Alloy of Law, which is Wax and Wayne Book 1, a little bit more. I just thought Alloy of Law felt more focused and streamlined, whereas Shadows of Self, especially in the first few chapters, I just felt like there's so many different things going on. And of course, they ended up all being related and connected, but it just felt a little bit more scattered at first. There were quite a few subplots. There were a few scenes where I was like, okay, I mean, I enjoyed being with the characters in the world and everything, but I'm not sure how much that actually advanced. So maybe those things do come back to be more important later. And also, I think part of the reason that I didn't engage with this book as much as I could have was just that I was reading it in a very choppy way. I would read just a small amount, and then it would be several days before I would read any more, and then I would read just a little bit more. And I was reading other stuff in between those times of reading Shadows of Self. So it was probably my fault as much as the book's fault. But even for all of that, I did like it. I liked how it built on the first one in the series and brought up some interesting stuff. For later in the series, I had somewhat mixed feelings about the big twist at the end. I was like, okay, I guess that's all right, and I can't really talk about it in detail without giving away a lot of spoilers. But I mean, I thought that it made sense and that it all came together, and the impact on the main character I did think was good. So it definitely made me feel ready to read the next book in the series. I also finished the Harry Potter series in October. I read The Deathly Hallows this month, so it was crazy to finally get to the end of the series. My favorite book from the series was still Order of the Phoenix, but book 7 is probably in about third place after Chamber of Secrets. I can't decide if it's above or below Chamber of Secrets, but it's definitely pretty high in my ranking of the books in the overall series. Actually, my favorite part of Deathly Hallows was the very middle of it. I thought it had a really cool, really moving midpoint, and that was really awesome. And that was something that I didn't know about either. Because the problem for me with the climax of Deathly Hallows was that I'd had so many spoilers. I knew so many of the things that were going to happen, and so I think the climax would have hit me a lot harder if it had all been a surprise, but unfortunately I knew that a lot of it was coming, so I couldn't really get the full force of the climax. There were still a couple of things that I didn't know about that did hit pretty hard. And I mean I still like the stuff that I did know about. I guess I expected the climax to be a little bit slower and more drawn out than it was, so that surprised me a little bit. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, that already happened. I thought that was going to be just a little bit harder or something. But again, that's probably because I sort of knew what was going to happen. It would be very interesting to reread it with the perspective of the whole series. In fact, the whole series, I can see why people reread it a lot because there are just so many things that seem pretty unimportant at first, and then they come back and turn out to be super important later in the series, and it's kind of mind-blowing sometimes be like, what, that was a really important object, I thought that didn't mean anything. Or a lot of just small mysteries strung out throughout the book where you'll be like, there's, I don't know what this is, what is this gonna mean, why is this gonna be important, and then you forget about it and then it comes back and it is really important. So I definitely get the reread value of all of that. And now we get to a fun part of the video because we get to talk about my library haul. So here I am just working on my October reading. Things are going fairly according to plan. And then I went to the library with some of my nieces, and so I was hanging out in the middle grade section. And I had not read very many middle grade books for a while, and I was just looking around at all these books like, oh my goodness, I forgot how good middle grade books are and how interesting their premises tend to be. And we were in like the kind of mystery slash scary book section, and middle grade just has so many good books in those general genres. So I went to the library to pick up these two books, which I had on hold, and I'll talk about these in a second. But I ended up with these three books as well, accidentally. So let's start by talking about this one that I actually planned to read and that I finished fairly early on, not super early in the month, but before most of these other library books. So this is Shadow of the Hedgeman by Orson Scott Card, and this is the sequel to the book that begins the sequel series to Ender's Game. So believe it or not, I actually read two books this month that are the second book in a sequel series. I guess I'm going to have to make some more videos about sequels soon, and specifically about sequel series, not just sequel books. Anyway, I did end up really enjoying this one. I saw some reviews for it that left me very conflicted because some people were like, this is so good, how are all these so good? And some people were like, there's no character development and no description in this one. And I was like, well, that would be sad. But I would disagree with that. I think there is actually a lot of character development, some really good character arcs, building off of everything that got started in Ender's Shadow, which is the book that comes before this one. There were several cool character arcs in that book, especially Beans, the main character's arc was cool in that book, but it was clearly not finished. And it's also clearly not finished after this book, but it has definitely taken some really important steps forward. Another thing that the review said, and this is actually in the author's note at the end, is that this is basically like a novel of the game Risk, which I also had mixed feelings about that, because on the one hand that sounds really cool, but on the other hand that sounded like it could get very dry. But I didn't actually think it was dry. I thought it was so cool. I was really invested. I was invested in the characters, but I was also just really curious what was going to happen, as basically these two teams of people were each trying to take over the world. And it's essentially two teams of kids each trying to take over the world, which sounds totally unbelievable, but I didn't find it unbelievable while I was reading it. It walks step by step through how this could work. And I mean, not everything is explained, but there's enough that's believable enough that it at least makes for really fun reading and also really thought-provoking reading. Like, wait, could that actually happen? And if you were trying to take over the world as a 13-year-old, how could you go about that? So this definitely made me want to keep reading the series. This is a group of books that I was not planning on reading this year, but I am probably going to get through at least a couple more of them before the end of the year. To continue my library haul, this is a book I definitely was not planning on reading. I did not put on my TBR at the beginning of the year, make sure you read Krytor the Blood Bat, but I wanted some just fun, kind of crazy middle grade reading when I went to the library. I saw all of these, super easy to read books, stereotypical fantasy settings. And I was like, I want some of that. I just really want some of that right now. And I found this one that said book one. And, when you find a book one of a series at the library, that is an exciting occasion. So I was like, I have to go for it. But what I didn't notice, and I don't even know if you'll be able to see this on the video, but it is actually book one of series 18. So I did still kind of feel like I was just jumping into the middle of stuff. I mean, it kind of blew my mind that there are 18 series. There are more than 18 series. This isn't the last one, but as you can see, these are all very short. It's even shorter than it looks because there's a lot of extra material at the end. There's like a sample chapter of the next book or something. But still, it was very fun. I came in for a fun read, and it was a fun read. it was pretty low stakes, at least it seemed that way to me without the background of the other series, because it's not really about the world ending, it's just two different kids competing for who's going to be the master of the beast. And the main character, Tom, is a really nice kid who's going to be a good master of the beast. The antagonist, Amelia, is kind of a mean girl who's going to be a bad mistress of the beast. So it's pretty simple, but I did definitely enjoy reading it. I appreciated that Tom was legitimately a very nice kid and that he was even nice to Amelia, even though she was being portrayed as the mean girl trope. And even Amelia and her, I think is her uncle, her helper, Dre, are portrayed as being human, even though they are pretty simple, mean guys. They're not pure evil, and they have vulnerabilities, and it's still portrayed as being the right thing to be kind to them, even if they are not being kind to other people. So I did appreciate that. I appreciated that Tom had courage and caring for the animals and everything. So I was like, you know what? I read this book to feel like I was 12, and I did feel like I was 12, and I think this would have been a good read for me when I was 12. So it was fun. I didn't feel like I needed to read any more of these, but I don't know, maybe at another time, if I just want something really easy and chill to read to just remind me how much fun fantasy is, maybe I will pick up another one of these. Also, this is half a book and half a game. Like, there's an app and there's a website, and you're supposed to collect all of these coins from the books and stuff. This is a very beaten up book. It must be really popular because it's seen a lot of wear and tear at the library. But like, if you get into this, you could spend so much time in this fantasy world. It would be pretty fun. Book 3 of the library haul is Mr. Monday by Garth Nix. Again, I found a book 1 of a series in the library, which was pretty remarkable, and I was like, I need it. And I've been wanting to read something by Garth Nix for a long time. I wasn't sure which of his books I would want to pick up, but this was the one that I found, so I went with it. And the beginning was totally amazing. I remember when I first read the prologue, I was like, that was incredible, and it was just so unusual. It was just so unlike anything that I had read before. It tells about this will that the trustees had split into several places to make sure that it couldn't be executed, and they put the first and least of the fragments into this unbreakable cage. They put 12 metal sentinels around it, each taking post on the numbers of a clock face that had been carved with permanent light and the dark matter of the defunct star. And it's just so cool. These sentinels are like deadly guards of the will, and nobody can ever get anywhere near it except that there's an inspector every few centuries or millennia. And then at the end of the prologue, you find out that the will has still found a way to escape. And it's just so cool. The imagery was really unique, and I was just very drawn in. I thought it was super awesome. Once we got to the main story with the protagonist, Arthur, I did actually like that too. I was a little bit worried because I felt like he's going to be the stereotypical fantasy protagonist. His name is literally Arthur, which is a very obvious King Arthur reference. And I was like, we're just going for all of the fantasy tropes, aren't we? But even though he is kind of a tropey protagonist, I liked him anyway because he was smart and he was responsible, he was active, he cared about other people. So I still enjoyed reading about him, even though, technically he is an orphan and he becomes the heir to this great otherworldly house and everything. So I was okay with it, even with the fantasy tropes. And there are plenty of things in this book that I would not say are tropes because they are just very, very weird. I have never seen anything quite like them before, but I enjoy the weirdness. It was a fun kind of weirdness. It wasn't like overly scary, although there are a few pretty dark parts. But there were also places where the plot dragged. There were some scenes that I felt like didn't advance the overall plot so much. And once Arthur actually goes into the house, which is, it's not exactly another world, but for purposes of this video, he goes into this other world, and it's almost impossible to die there. So even though the stakes in our world at the same time are very high, there are not a lot of stakes within the house where Arthur is. And while I would say that the general theme of the book is about learning to face fear, not everything felt super thematically unified around that. And Arthur was honestly pretty good at facing fear at the beginning, so it didn't necessarily seem like quite the lesson that he needed to learn. But I still really enjoyed reading this. The ending was very interesting. I like the ending enough that part of me does kind of want to read the rest of the books. There are 7 books, one for each day of the week. So we'll see if I decide to pick up another one of these. I definitely thought that it was interesting. And if you're looking for fantasy with just super unique and interesting imagery and symbolism and just inventive creatures and worlds and everything, you'll probably have a lot of fun with this. And also, the other thing that I liked about this book is that the main character has asthma. And I have not seen a whole lot of fantasy books where the protagonist has a physical ailment, some kind of chronic illness that just kind of makes life harder and is a constant obstacle for him. And so I appreciated the way that that was dealt with. And I liked the way that Arthur had to deal with that. It was a little bit easy for him again once he got into the house to deal with that, but in general I liked how that was done. Another one of the books that I actually meant to get at the library was Macbeth. I had not read this before. I had read a couple other Shakespeare plays before and not really been a big fan of any of them, but I wanted to give Shakespeare another try, and I thought that this book sounded more interesting than some of the ones that I had read before. It technically could be considered fantasy because it has witches and spirits and stuff, so technically it has magical elements and could probably be considered fantasy. And I actually really liked this one. I felt like finally a Shakespeare book made sense to me. I understood where the people were coming from and what was going on with them. And the language finally made more sense to me too. The other Shakespeare books that I've read, like I've understood the words, but I've come upon places where I've been like, why would you say that in that way? Like, why would you make this simple thing so complicated to say? And maybe that was just me not appreciating it, or maybe Macbeth is just extra well written. I don't know, but I actually thought that the more poetic phrasings were very interesting and thought provoking and brought up a lot of cool images in my imagination. So I actually appreciated the more complicated wording this time, and I would definitely like to reread it and do some more thinking about some of the lines that I maybe skipped over a little bit, where I was like, I think I know what that means, but I didn't really dig into the way that he expressed that. So it would be cool to go back and dig into it again. And it sounds kind of weird and terrible to say, but the murders honestly do make the plot pretty interesting. It makes for pretty interesting reading because people keep getting killed, and the descriptions of like the nights when it happens is in like the time of day. There aren't like knights in armor in this book, but the murders keep happening at nighttime, and like just the description of the atmosphere is really tense and charged, and you can just tell that something really terrible happened, and it just keeps getting worse and worse, and it's like where is this going to go? How is this going to get resolved? And it is pretty cool to watch the progression of both the external really decay of all of Scotland. It's the whole country that is really in trouble because of what Macbeth and his wife are doing, and then also their own internal decay is really interesting to watch progress. So this made me want to read some more Shakespeare. Maybe I'll be up for some Hamlet next. The last book that I got from the library as part of my library haul is Amari and the Night Brothers. And I have not finished reading this yet. I am not even that far of the way through it. And we'll see if I want to finish it right now. I'm not actually sure that I do. I think this is maybe not the right time for me to read this because I just finished reading Harry Potter, and it is quite similar to Harry Potter in a lot of ways. From what I've heard, it also sounds pretty similar to Percy Jackson, just with different character, a slightly different magic system. But yeah, so far, whether it's the timing or whatever, it's just not pulling me in that much. It kind of feels like all of the other middle grade fantasies where the main character is special, was just born special for some reason. It kind of feels like chosen one trope, and the magic basically just seems like all the supernatural characters from everything. So it feels kind of general and not very specific because I've seen a lot of books with Atlantis and vampires and werewolves and these various supernatural creatures from books. I've just seen that before. So I haven't really come across anything in this book yet that is like, oh, I haven't seen that before. And that's really cool. So I'm not sure that this is one that I'm fiddling with my bookmark here. I'm just not sure that this is the right book for me right now, so I might actually put this back for the time being, and then maybe at another time I will feel like I want to give it another try. Last but not least, these are the two nonfiction books that I've been working on this month. I read half of this one in September, so I've just been finishing that up this month. Obviously, it's very big and has been taking me a while to get through. And then I did finish this one, which is a biography of Jim Elliot. And then this one is about paintings and music and poems and some like stories or essays about Old Testament stories and subjects. So that's been interesting, partially just because it gives an overview of a lot of well-known artists, but also because it's kind of interesting to see how, because this book is from the 1950s, so it's also interesting to see how these stories and the art about them were viewed in the 1950s. And also some of my favorites have been the pictures. Some of the pictures are just really really cool. So I've been appreciating that and how it gives kind of a new perspective on a lot of these stories. And then I also started reading Dracula. So we'll see if I finish that this month or not. Obviously, it would be convenient to finish it on Halloween, but I don't know if I'm going to make it by then or not, so I might have to finish that one actually next month. But I'm not really far enough into it yet to talk about very much, but I'm sure I will talk about it more in the future. So I think I talked about 12 books today. So if I actually finish all of these books, then I think I will have finished 12 books in October, and that will be my biggest month yet of reading. That will be more books than I've ever finished in a month. But definitely some of these I did work on in September, so it's not like I completely read all of these in October. But I've still definitely been able to finish a lot of books this month. It helped to have some shorter ones from the library. And I've really enjoyed them all too. It's been a good month for reading as far as quality books and not just the quantity of books. Another thing that I haven't done in quite a while is a t-shirt of the month. And I know this video is already getting long, but I got a new t-shirt and I wanted to show you guys, and it's my Author Conservatory t-shirt with our wonderful tree logo. This one it's so comfortable. It's a really nice fabric, and I finally actually have a t-shirt of the online writing school that I'm in. So that is very nice to have. I got a hoodie also, and I am very excited to have both of them. Those were my gift to myself for starting year 3 of the conservatory. Okay, after that, I don't think I have anything else to say. That was a pretty long video for me. So let me know what you've been reading this month and if you've read any of these books. I'll look forward to hearing from you about that. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like these videos, and join that 50 plus who have already subscribed. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!